Our next lesson in imperialism takes us to China. The big idea for this lesson: the economic, political, and military strength of European imperialists challenged China's Middle Kingdom. The essential question for this lesson: how did Western powers use diplomacy and war to gain power in Qin, China? The aim of the lesson: describe how imperialist countries controlled China, analyze the conflicts, treaties, and policies that occurred as a result of imperialism in China. Let's set the stage. For centuries, Chinese regulations had ensured that China had a favorable balance of trade with other nations. A nation's balance of trade refers to the difference between how much a country imports or brings in and how much it exports or sends out. By the 1800s, however, Western nations were using their growing power to tilt the balance of trade with East Asia in their favor. Impact of the opium trade. During the late 1700s, British merchants began making huge profits by trading opium grown in India for Chinese tea. Many Chinese had become addicted to the drug. Silver flowed out of China in payment for the drug, disrupting the economy. As a result, China tried to hold imports of the addictive drug. The drawing on this slide shows a British official pouring opium into the mouth of someone from China. A letter to the Queen. A Chinese government official named Lin Zhu wrote a letter to Britain's Queen Victoria condemning the opium trade. She wrote, "We have heard that in your own country, opium is prohibited or not allowed, with the utmost strictness and severity. This is strong proof that you know full well how hurtful it is, since you do not permit it to injure anyone in your own country. You ought not to have this injurious drug transferred to another country." As a result of China trying to prevent the flow of opium into their country, the First Opium War occurred. In the First Opium War, British gunboats equipped with the latest in firepower bombarded Chinese coastal and river ports. This was done in response to the Chinese seizure of opium cargo. With outdated weapons and fighting methods, the Chinese were easily defeated. As the result of losing the First Opium War, the Chinese were forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. This was the first unequal treaty that forced China to make concessions. China gave Hong Kong to Britain, paid for Britain's cost of the war, opened up 4 large cities to foreign trade with low tariffs or taxes, and granted British citizens extraterritoriality, the right to live in China under their own laws and justice system. The Western powers carved out spheres of influence, which are areas in which an outside power, in this case Britain, claimed exclusive trading rights in China. It's very important to remember the Treaty of Nanking is an unequal treaty. How did British trade with China trigger the Opium Wars? China tried to stop the lucrative opium trade. In response, the British used their superior military to their advantage and easily defeated China. Next, the Taiping Rebellion occurred, which was a peasant revolt. By the 1800s, the Qin dynasty was in decline. Chinese peasants, angry at their poverty and at corrupt Qin officials, rose up in revolt. The Manchus defeated the rebellion after 14 years with the help of the British military. It was probably the most devastating peasant revolt in history. The Taiping Rebellion almost toppled the Qin dynasty. It is estimated to have caused the deaths of between 20 and 30 million Chinese. In the Second Opium War, China was defeated by several Western powers, Britain, France, and the US, and again forced to accept unfavorable trade terms for the foreseeable future. Just like in the First Opium War, China was again trying to stop the flow of opium into their country. And it started another war, and once again they lost to the West because of their superior military. As a result of losing 2 opium wars and signing unequal treaties, U.S. Secretary of State John Hay promoted the open door policy among imperialist powers in 1899. The policy gave all nations equal access to trade in China. It guaranteed that China would not be politically or economically dominated by any one imperialist power. The open door policy is the same as the Berlin Conference, when all the imperialist powers figured out amongst themselves how to share or carve up Africa. And you can see in the picture on the slide, Otto von Bismarck is slicing up China as if it were a pizza pie. The imperialist powers had a sphere of influence over the country of China. What idea did the open door policy reflect upon? It reflected the intense spirit of competition among global powers during the age of imperialism, and all imperial countries accepted the United States' proposal except Russia. As a result of the open door policy and the unfair treatment by the imperialist powers, a patriotic uprising called the Boxer Rebellion occurred, led by Chinese nationalists who were against Western rule and their sphere of influence over China. The rebellion had been secretly sponsored by the Empress Dowager Cixi. Her ties with the underground rebel group known as the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, or otherwise known as Boxers, encouraged the uprising. The rebellion was put down by an 8-nation alliance in a short time, only 55 days. Empress Cixi was forced to accept humiliating peace terms. What were the consequences of the Boxer Rebellion? China once again had to make concessions, which means to give something up to the imperialist powers or the foreigners. China expanded economically. Mining, shipping, railroads, banking, exports of cash crops grew. The Boxer uprising spread nationalism as reformers wanted to strengthen China's government. By the early 1900s, reformers introduced a constitutional monarchy. Some reformers even called for a republic. Why did the Boxer Rebellion occur? The Chinese people resented imperialism, and they were upset about foreign nations taking over what they believed was rightfully theirs. Review question. Extraterritoriality can best be described as which of the following? A. Exemption of foreigners from the laws of the country in which they live. B. Expansion of a country's international borders to natural boundaries. C. Extension of dual citizenship to immigrants. D. Acquisition of new colonies or territories. The answer is A. Exemption of foreigners from the laws of the country in which they live. The British frustration caused by the enormous trade deficit with China led to A. A temporary end of trade between the two countries. B. Repeated interventions by the Royal Navy. C. The British overthrow of the Qin government. D. British exports of opium to China. The answer is D. British exports of opium to China. Let's answer our essential question. How did Western powers use diplomacy and war to gain power in Qin China? 1. During the late 1700s, British merchants began making huge profits by trading opium, which led to the First Opium War. 2. British gunboats, equipped with the latest in firepower, easily defeated the Chinese. 3. The Chinese were forced to sign the first unfair treaty, the Treaty of Nanking. 4. The Taiping Rebellion almost topples the Qin dynasty and causes the death of up to 30 million Chinese. 5. The Second Opium War forced China to accept unfavorable trade terms for the foreseeable future. 6. The U.S. promoted the open door policy, which gave all nations equal access to trade in China. And 7. The Boxer Rebellion was put down by an 8-nation alliance, and China was once again forced into an unfavorable deal. This is the end of the lesson. Please complete the assignment that goes along with this lesson.